Okay, here we go for part 2. Then we were off. It was just a gentle canter at first. I think they were seeing if I could keep up with them. Well, that was no problem. I could go like that for hours, especially without the mail bags and Mr. Cooper's weight to carry. Up the road at first, away from the diggings, then across country, heading up the valley through the trees. They slowed down for that as the branches were hanging so low that the first rider kept yelling, "Dark!" But the branches were no trouble to me. The forest at Sawyer's Crossing is twice as thick. Then suddenly Fred pulled at the reins. "Whoa, Patches, lad," he whispered, and we were there. What's your prediction? It was just a bend in the road, white in the moonlight with the tree shadows dark across it. But there was good cover where we were. We could see the road, but no one could see us. We were just shadows with the other shadows in the trees. The riders all dismounted. Fred stroked my neck. "He kept up all right," said Tallest. Hairy Hands snorted. "That little doddle. A poodle could have kept up back there." "He's sure-footed," said Fred. "Not even winded, see?" Hairy Hands laughed. "We'll find a proper mount for you tomorrow, up on the Tableland Farms," he promised. "What's the time, Mike?" Tallest pulled out a handsome timepiece from his pocket, like a pocket watch. It glinted gold in the moonlight, and I wondered who he'd stolen it from. "Half an hour till dawn," he said. "We made better time than I thought. They'll be here soon." We heard them first. 6 horses, my ears said, and a coach too, coming up from the diggings. And then we saw it, the cloud of dust, the 3 reflector lamps, bright red beacons in the early light. 4 horses and the coach. Only 4 horses, I thought. I was sure that I'd heard 6. But then there was no time to think. The other 2 were in the saddle, urging their horses forward, and Fred spurred me forward too. It takes courage to stand in the middle of a coaching road with 4 horses bearing down on you, and the coach behind them too. I never knew how much courage it took till then. The coach screeched to a halt, the driver swearing, and the coach wheels screaming, and the horses neighing with fright. 4 horses. I lifted my head and smelt the air. There were more horses somewhere near. I was sure of it. But the boy on my back didn't seem to suspect anything. Sometimes it seems to me that humans only see half the world. Are you adjusting your predictions as we go? "Stand and deliver," called Tallest, pistol in one hand and reins in the other. And the others had drawn their pistols too. The driver laughed. "Well, you've got me banged to rights, lads," he said. "The gold's under the seat if you want it." "Get it out then, and fast about it," ordered Tallest. "Surely, surely, keep your hair on," said the driver. He was still grinning. He moved his legs and the big bag of straw he'd used to keep them warm, and hauled a small trunk out from under the seat. "It's all yours," he said. "Open it," ordered Tallest. The driver shook his head. "Well, that's one thing I can't be obliging you with," he said, all friendly-like. "Be hanged with you," yelled Tallest, pulling on the reins of his anger, so his horse skittered under him. "Open that chest," I said. The driver held the chest out. "See, lads, it's locked, you see, but I'm sure fine strong boys like yourselves will have no trouble with it." Tallest cantered over and swung the chest up on the saddle in front of him. A woman's face peered out of the coach. Someone muttered something inside and she looked away. Tallest's mount skittered closer to the coach door. "Everyone out!" yelled Tallest. "I want you all—" His voice broke off. What predictions are you making? Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Even Fred could sense it now. I could feel him tense up on my back. The driver was too obliging. The passengers not scared enough. Hoofbeats rang out suddenly round the bend. "A trap!" yelled Tallest. "Troopers, run for it, boys!" Troopers were what they called the police at that time. They were gone before I had time to blink. The chest rolled onto the ground. Fred's spurs pressed into my sides, but I'd leapt before I felt them. Something barked behind me, a new smell, harsh and sour. One of the troopers had fired their pistol. I half expected the Bushrangers to return fire, but what would be the point? Firing pistols would slow them down. Better to gallop off to safety, out of the reach of pistol fire. Their horses were finer than anything the troopers would be riding. 2 of their horses at any rate. Fred only had me. I tried. I bent my head. I pushed my legs, my heart, my breath. I did the best I could. Fred knew it. I never felt the spurs again. His head bent low above me. He whispered, "You can do it, boy." I couldn't. I didn't have their speed. The other 2 horses grew further away in front. Another pistol barked behind. I felt Fred start and then slump. They'd hit him. I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. The horses in front were no nearer, but I heard the hoofbeats behind me growing slowly fainter. I was leaving them behind. Along the dusty road and round the bend, along the road again. They were no closer, but still no further away behind. Another pistol shot. Was I out of reach or not? Suddenly, the horses in front swerved into the bush. There was no answering tug of the reins or words above from Fred, but at least he was still in the saddle. I dashed from the road after them. We were under the trees now, and instinctively I knew that Fred was too dazed to duck away from the branches. I swerved, trying to keep the way as clear as possible. Down a gully, slippery with ferns and mossy rocks. I mightn't have the speed out on the road, but I knew how to scramble down a gully and up the other side. The hoofbeats behind were fainter now, the horses in front still close enough to see. Up into the hills, and I was gaining on them now. I was good on hills in those days. Up and further up, out of the valley and along the ridge, our hooves striking at the stones, then down the other side, where trees grew thick again and wattle dusted from overhead. Another gully and thicker trees. There was no pressure on my reins at all now. Fred sat limply in the saddle, his upper body lying along my neck, but at least he was still there. The moon had set. The evening star had faded. The yellow stars whitened and lost their fire. The sky turned pink, and then the world turned grey instead of black. A magpie called somewhere, and then a kookaburra. The trees looked broken against the paler sky. There was no sound of pursuit now, but the troopers might be doubling around. They might catch us still. The bushrangers' horses galloped through the trees, and I still followed. The ground levelled out, thin soil and thinner trees and gleams of quartz that caught the sun. No wombat holes at least. The country was too poor for wombats here. Still we kept on running. The sun climbed harsh and hot above the trees. The sweat ran down my legs. My back screamed under the saddle. I'd never been ridden so fast, so hot, so long. Fred slumped across my neck. I kept my galloping as steady as I could for fear that he might fall off. Suddenly a fence loomed up before me. The other horses leapt it. I knew that if I tried, that Fred would fall and I would fall as well, most like. I'd never jumped a fence before. I swerved as gracefully as I could. I felt Fred clutch my mane. He was conscious then, at least. I galloped along the fence, and then there was a gate, and there was Hairy Hands and the horse before me. He swung down off his horse and pulled the gate open. "Not long now," he said to Fred. "Hold hard." Across a paddock, more stones than potatoes, then up a rise. There were fruit trees and what looked like a farm and a tumble-down shed and the welcome barking of dogs. I caught the smell of sheep. My breath was tearing at my lungs. I could hardly see or walk, but suddenly I heard a "Whoa, boy, whoa." A hand grabbed at my bridle, and Fred was lifted off. "How is he?" asked Tallest's voice, and then a woman's voice asked, "What's wrong?" I stood there, trying to draw breath. The hot sweat dried upon my sides. I longed to drink and to shift the saddle's weight. How had I ever thought it light? Then finally there were hands tugging at my reins, and I was led off to the shed. The hands lifted off my saddle and rubbed me down. I was led up and down until my ribs stopped heaving and the sweat stopped breaking through my coat. At long last there was water in a bucket. I drank and hung my head. You're making connections? You know what it feels like to be that tired and thirsty? Someone else came into the shed. "He did all right," said a voice. It was Hairy Hands, who'd been so scornful before. Who'd have thought it? That was Tallest. He stroked my neck. The boy was right. He's got a heart in him, this horse has. He's done for now, though, said Hairy Hands. No matter, said Tallest. Fred can double back me till we get home. And I realised that we hadn't arrived at safety yet. The other horses should be right to go in an hour or so. And Fred? He'll have to be, said Tallest shortly. We can't stop here. This place is good enough to keep dark in for an hour or two, but it won't be safe for long. They left me then. I looked around the shed. Bark walls, hens scratching in the straw. This might be my life when the Bushrangers left, pulling a plough among the potatoes. Or even worse, sold off to Cobb and Co. I dozed on and off. I was too wary to doze long, and the hay smelt musty too. Suddenly there were voices again outside. You making more predictions? A man's voice, a stranger, and Tallest and the woman I'd heard before. Then Hairy Hands came in and led the other horses out, but he left me there. Then there was another voice. It was Fred's. He was protesting about something. His voice was weak but stubborn. No, he said, you have to take him back. Not today. He's done enough all today. Tomorrow. Look, here's some cash. And I heard the clink of coins. £5. That should be enough for 10 times the trouble. That horsey saved my life. I want him taken home. There was a mutter, then Tallest's voice, hard and harsh. Look sharp, we've no time for chat. You heard what he said, and you know what you can expect if it's not done. Another mutter, and then the sound of 2 fine horses, Bushrangers' horses, cantering up the road. So he took me home, the stranger from the farm, leading me by easy stages down the valley road, while he rode another horse in front. It was good to be home with the hills around me and the familiar echoes of the diggers down the road. Mrs. Cooper hugged me and gave me oats, just like after I'd done the mail. And Mr. Cooper brought me down an apple and treated the sores on my back that I'd got from being ridden so hard for so long. There was no sign of Centipede, that fine big chestnut horse in our paddock. I suppose his original owners had collected him already. News of a horse like that spreads fast. Mr. Cooper took Rex with the mail the next time to give me a rest. But they were 2 nights gone, not one, with Mrs. Cooper looking anxiously through the window. Rex just didn't know the route like me, and besides, he'd sped for half an hour and limped the rest. He never learnt to pace himself, old Rex. So things returned to normal, or almost so. For years I listened on moonlight nights in case the clip of hooves came down the road again. But all I heard were possums in the trees and the wombat grunting and Mrs. Cooper's snores that floated out the window till Mr. Cooper nudged her to roll over. And then the house was quiet. For years I wondered what happened to Fred. Did he recover from his wound? Did he keep at bushranging till they caught him and hung him by the neck till he was dead? When people passed, I listened to their voices to see if I could pick Fred's out. More people came to the post office now. They built a bank down the road too, and a police station, and then a courthouse as well. The telegraph line arrived at the post office. The Coopers now cashed money orders. Their son came to live with them, bringing his wife to help deliver the telegrams across the valley. Sometimes when the coach dropped off the mail, there'd be a crowd of people gossiping on the post office steps. The children with their lollipops, the women in their go-to-town hats, the men discussing cattle prices or how much gold the White Ridge mine was crushing. It was on a day like this, an ordinary sort of day, that one of the men strolled down towards our paddock. He had a beard and wore boots and moleskins like any of the farmers on the steps. He clicked his fingers at me and held something in his hand. I wandered over and held it out. It was a carrot. I took it from his hand and crunched it between my teeth, and the same hand stroked my neck. Thanks, Patches, was all he said. Then he was gone. No bushranger dies old. I like to think that night taught Fred a lesson, just like it taught me. You know, I dreamt before that day, dreamt I was a Brumpy like my father, with a harem of mares hidden in the bush, Dreamt I was a racehorse winning the Hawkesbury Guineas by 6 lengths. Dreamt I galloped with a bushranger down a moonlit road. And now I stand in my paddock with Sam and Rex. We chase the roos who trespass on our grass, ignore the wombats as they chomp the tussocks or scratch inside their holes. I feel the sunlight on my back or the rain that brings the grass, and eat my oats twice each fortnight, when we leave with the mail bags and when we return. And I glance at Mr. Cooper through the window, munching at his buttered scones, while Mrs. Cooper stokes the fire in the stove. They're small pleasures compared to the wild ride I knew that night, but I am content. I hope that somehow Fred has learnt those pleasures too. The gentle joy of tending a corn crop by the creek, or watching his children play amongst the trees. Maybe he's even learnt to enjoy riding a horse like me, a steady, loyal horse, who was never meant to carry a bushranger, but was a king for a short time in the night. And that's the end of that chapter.